Hello, I'm Rabia Chaudhry. I invite you to join me every Tuesday for new episodes of Nighty Night Bedtime Stories to Keep You Awake, now on Podcast One. This new incarnation of Nighty Night is an anthology of stories that bring to life classic horror stories, some you're definitely familiar with, and others you'll be hearing for the first time. Join me as I tuck you into bed with stories that will leave you sleepless all night long. Get new episodes of Nighty Night every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Get your baby's butt into Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby. I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are The Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we discuss the first responders' testimony. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my lighthearted co-host, Alice.
Hi, Brett. Anything but, especially when you spend all day listening to the Karen Read trial at 1.5 speed.
The sacrifices
I actually thought
we
people
make.
in my life were talking too slowly because I had been used to it. But thank you for thinking I'm lighthearted.
Yeah, my wife now is like, are we going to watch the trial tonight? Like, yeah,
Aww.
Sure. Why not? It's fine. We haven't already been watching it all day, but that's fine. So we watch a lot of it too. And that's a good thing because that's what we're covering, right? So
this is what we do for you guys. And here's the thing, you can see clips of it on TV, but remember, trial goes on for like hours and hours a day. And even at 1.5 speed, that's a lot of hours of trial to get to watch. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't go watch it, but if you didn't want to spend all day, every day, watching the Karen Read trial, we're here for you.
There you go. God bless those jurors.
God bless those jurors indeed.
Ask the same question, phrased 10 different ways. It's like, okay, we get it. But okay, so we're back. We're going to talk about first responders today. I do want to say one thing because I feel like we always have to comment at the beginning of these episodes. Not surprisingly to me, but we've only done 2 episodes. We haven't even released the first one publicly. And already people are upset that we're calling this a conspiracy theory. And I want you, number one, we're not doing it in the pejorative way. It is literally the theory of the defense. The theory of the defense is that there was a conspiracy. And I think it's important that we all be honest about what we're saying in this case. If you think Karen Read did this, then you think an ordinary woman, successful, basically ran over her boyfriend and left him to die in the snow. Own it. If that's what you think, own it. If you don't think she did that and you agree with the defense, then you think that the people at that house, including the McCabe's and the Alberts, either conspired to kill John or conspired to lure him there for a fight, or just got into a fight with him and then decided to murder him, to leave him in the cold to die. And then they were assisted in covering that up with various members of the police department who were either friends with him or related to them. Own it. If that's what you think, own it. And I see a lot of people use sort of code words like, well, I don't know exactly what happened, but something strange happened in that house. I just think there's more than what we're hearing. No, don't do that. Own it. That's what you think happened. And that's fine. And I will say this about Turtle Boy, who is very controversial. A lot of people hate him. One thing you can't say about that man, he owns it. Like, he is out there saying this is a murder conspiracy. These people conspired to murder this man, and the police, who are corrupt, helped them pull it off. And hat tip to him for saying exactly what he thinks. And I think we all need to own it as we're going through this and looking at the evidence and watching these people on the stand. Like, you need to watch these people on the stand and decide whether or not they did this. You need to listen to the evidence and decide whether or not Karen Read did this. Own it. This is not fiction, and it's not a sport. It's real life. All these people's lives, from Karen Read down to, Colin Albert, who's like 17 when this happened. Their lives are on the line here, and I think we all need to be honest about what we're saying, and we're going to continue to do that, whether it irritates people or not.
And let's be clear, when we say we're not using the term conspiracy in the pejorative way, literally a conspiracy in the legal sense are people, more than one person, and usually, you can charge a conspiracy with two people, but here we're talking about many, many more than two people. But all you need for a conspiracy is two or more people who have a meeting of the minds to carry out something illegal. And also think about what exact conspiracy is your theory of the case. Is it that they conspired to lure John to the house to kill him? Or is it that he died, maybe even in some not intentful way? Like he died, whatever it was. He overdosed. I don't know. He tripped. He died, whatever it was. But they conspired to cover it up because that's also a conspiracy. But there are different conspiracies actually that are being laid out by the defense. And you don't have to buy every single one of them. But when you say something fishy happened, what you're saying is something fishy happened that was illegal. That is a conspiracy. And we need to use words that have meaning that we agree upon in order to talk about this case, instead of just, I have a bad feeling about this. And that's what we're trying to do, is put words to what you're seeing in court and also what people are saying euphemistically without actually using the words that have the legal meaning behind it. With that, With that, though, this is why it's important, because we are going through witness testimony, and these witnesses were at the prosecution phase of the case. As of the time of recording, the prosecution is still presenting their case. So, of course, they're the ones calling the witnesses to make sure there's evidence to meet the legal standard for the charges that Karen Read is indicted with. But listen to what the cross-examination is, because so far in the witnesses we've covered, I believe almost every single one of them, except maybe a family member or two, are, by the cross-examination, implied to be part of this conspiracy, implied to know something, to cover up something illicit in order to frame Karen Read. So that's why this is important, because even though these are prosecution witnesses, the defense is starting to put on its conspiracy case now.
And we're going to see more of that today. And just one aside, Turtle Boy, if you don't know who that is, he's a blogger in Massachusetts, a citizen journalist who uncovers corruption in the police and truly believes that Karen Read is innocent and there is a corrupt cover-up. And he has been very vocal about that, to the point that I think he currently has 16 felony charges for witness intimidation. So he's very passionate and committed. And, you know, if you watch the trial, occasionally you see arguments about whether he can be in the courtroom or not. So he's very much a part of this case. But with all that said, let's get to Anthony Flametti. Okay.
Anthony Flametti. He is a Canton firefighter. And when you watch him testify, and there's a lot that he's going to say, cross-examination is pretty arduous. I mean, I think it's going to be arduous for just about all of the witnesses. But he's very matter-of-fact. He's non-emotional. He is, you know, a professional, and it comes off. It doesn't seem like he has an agenda. He answers the question before him. And he is a Canton firefighter. He said that when he arrived, he saw John O'Keefe. He said he saw something on the ground, who ended up being John O'Keefe. And he was covered by 4 to 6 inches of snow at the time that Flametti arrived on the scene. Now, in contrast to Nettle, who we talked about last time, Timothy Nettle, also a Canton firefighter, who had said, remember, that he saw John O'Keefe in like a big, heavy coat dressed for the weather. Flametti said that John was underdressed for the weather, in that he just had a long-sleeve t-shirt on and jeans. Now, he did see Karen Read on the scene, and he said that she seemed incredibly distraught and was kind of running back and forth in a frantic manner. And he tried to engage her, asking questions about John and what was going on. But all she would say over and over in this frantic state was, I hit him, oh my God, I hit him. And he testifies to trying to ask her specifics, you know, like, you hit him where, with what? But that's all she continues to say. She's not really engaging in this conversation because she's not really in a state of mind to be conversing. Now, Then the prosecution kind of leads him through all of the interventions that were done to attempt to save John's life. They talk about his body temperature and all through these interventions, it's clear that Flamati is, again, that very matter of fact, like, well, we're there to try to see if there's life-saving capabilities. If he's, if there's no lividity, then we can try to save his life. If his limbs move and there's no, rigor mortis, there's hope. So we're going to do certain life-saving measures that could help. And he says the limbs were moving and there was not the lividity. And so that's why they were doing life-saving measures. And he says, I focused on that because my job as a firefighter was to try and save his life if that was possible at all.
And I think Flamati is one of the ones who talks about how sometimes when someone's really cold, that actually is an opportunity to save a life that you would not be able to save otherwise. That sort of being in that low temperature can preserve life in bizarre ways. I mean, there are crazy stories about that. And that was sort of their hope, even though there wasn't a lot of signs of life with John, that nevertheless, there might be a possibility once you warm him up and get his core temperature up, that maybe you could get his heart started. And because of how cold he was, he might be able to have sort of a miraculous recovery. But obviously that didn't happen.
And one thing to note, if you watch his testimony, is he's not defensive about, for example, not being able to say more or engage Karen Read more, because he's like, I'm there to save his life. That was my job. He's not defensive about it. He doesn't try to make up answers, because you'll have witnesses sometimes who try to give whoever's asking the question answers. He's like, I don't know. I was focused on his core temperature. I was focused on chest compressions. I was focused on, X, Y, and Z medically. And he explains all of these medical interventions, and there were a lot of them. Then, of course, the defense gets to cross-examine him. And the defense noted that the conversation he said he had with Read, where Read was saying, I hit him, oh my God, I hit him. This wasn't actually in a report anywhere created by Flamati. Now, remember who Flamati is. He's a firefighter. Now, Flamati notes that that's because his report writing ends at the transfer of the patient. So it's not likely to be in any report. One thing to note, though, so he's saying that's not my duty, right? Like if you were a police officer, we talked about earlier that when a police officer doesn't put something like, I hit him, it's my fault, in the police report, that's a problem. But he's a firefighter who's there to save life. One thing to note, though, when he testified at the grand jury, he did testify about this conversation with Karen Read, and it's consistent with what he testified to at trial. Now, Flamati does recall telling the doctors and nurses that there was a question about whether John was hit by a vehicle. The defense attempts to make something of him having never said anything about this before. Like it was a Perry Mason moment. Like, you're just now telling us that you doubted whether it was a vehicle that caused these injuries? And Flamati says, no one ever asked me what I said to the doctors. And the reason I said that to the doctors is that was for medical purposes. So it wasn't me investigating. It was me trying to do everything I could to save John's life. And then the defense puts on the TV for everyone to watch dash cam footage. This is Officer Serif's dash cam. And then I didn't think this was like great trial presentation for whatever reason. The screen is like split in half horizontally. So like Serif's dash cam is on one half of the screen and the other half is actually Officer Good's dash cam, but they're not like at the same time. Like one is a parked car, the other one is driving through the snow. And it's actually a little bit difficult to watch both at the same time because they're not like different angles of the same view. They're just two different dash cam. And I got very confused, Brett, watching it.
I couldn't see anything. And I couldn't follow really anything.
What I got from it was there was
either.
A lot of snow. And another thing that I got from it was how pitch black it was. Even though this is the morning, it's like 6:30 in the morning, it looked like it was the middle of the night. And from the driving dash cam, you can see that there's just snow pelting down onto the car. And it made me understand better how difficult it would be to search in those conditions with that snow and it being looking like it was pitch black outside. So whatever the reason for having the split screen of the two dash cams, the defense kind of plays seconds of the video and then freezes it. And he keeps doing this back and forth because the point of it is to try and show that Flamati, who was on scene, never spoke to Karen Read. The whole point of the entire cross-examination is to undermine the I hit him, oh my God, I hit him statement by Karen Read that Flamati testifies to. I can't really see that in the dash cam video because there's just so much going on. There's so much snow. There's so many people walking back and forth. Really, all they get is Flamati saying over and over, I don't know if that's a person that walked by. I don't know if that's Karen. I don't know if that's me. I don't know who's doing chest compressions. It's very blurry. And ultimately, he undercuts that entire kind of line of cross-examination by explaining that he had the conversation with Karen Read at the beginning of his interactions with her and not the part of the dash cam that the defense is showing. And that makes sense. I can understand that because when you get to a scene and someone's there, you probably try to talk to them first as you're trying to figure out how to save this man's life, right? Rather than trying to save his life and then later on, 30 minutes later, turning to the woman who is frantically screaming right next to you to get more information, right? So it makes sense that it would happen at the beginning. I thought this was ineffective cross. It dragged on for a very long time. It spanned multiple days, or 2 days at least. And Flamati kind of was, again, matter of fact, unemotional, didn't seem to be part of any conspiracy. It's not like everything he said was fantastic for the prosecution. Remember, he's testifying that John seemed to be dressed in inappropriate cold weather clothes, which if you want this to be Karen Read hit him after he got out of the car, you want him to be fully clothed in winter garments and he had never been inside, right? So his testimony is not like a slam dunk for the prosecution's theory, but he also doesn't seem to have like a bone in this fight.
And this goes back to, it's important to watch this stuff. You can read coverage of it. You can listen to us talk about it. You can listen to other people talk about it. He might say the exact opposite thing. Watch him. Judge his body language for yourself. I thought he's a big problem for the defense, frankly, because what he says Karen Read said is very important because it's one of several times that day where someone heard her say, I hit him. And it's interesting, it's interesting how coverage can change facts because we've had people say things like in the gallery talking about this case that nobody ever said this until trial. It's like, no, people were saying it immediately that she said that. And Flamati doesn't have an obvious connection to the family. So you have to either believe he's doing this as a favor to Katie McLaughlin, who's going to come up later, or he's just been confused that in the months later, he's sort of been brainwashed into believing he heard this. And that's possible. I'm not saying that's not possible. We've talked about this before. Memory is a fallible thing, but he comes off very credible. And he does say, essentially, he wants to talk to her to get some information, like Alice was saying, so he can treat this guy. So he goes up. What's happened here? And all she can say is, I hit him, my God, I hit him. And so he just passes her off to Katie McLaughlin, who's going to testify in a minute. Before we get to McLaughlin, though, first we have Matthew Kelly, who is also a Canton firefighter. He remembers John had on a hoodie, which is different from both Flamati and Nettle. And this just goes back to eyewitness testimony, man. Like it's always something. And I hear people, the defense has done a pretty good job of trying to show inconsistencies in testimony. And I'm just always surprised that that's so effective, particularly amongst true crime fans who follow a lot of cases. I would think by now we would all understand witness testimony is always inconsistent. Every single person who views a scene brings their own experience, vantage point, memory, everything else to it. The fact that it's inconsistent, to me, makes me believe most of what these people are saying. Now, obviously, I doubt all eyewitness testimony, but if they were all telling me the same thing, then I'm thinking they cooked the story up. They rehearsed the story together. They made sure to get their story straight. And that's the whole point of getting your story straight, right? So there won't be any inconsistencies. And there's just inconsistencies all the time. And I think it's because these people are telling the truth. This guy has no reason to lie. He doesn't even say anything particularly helpful for the prosecution. He says that John's only wearing one shoe. He says that Karen has blood on her around her mouth and that she's hysterical. And all he heard her scream was, he's dead. He's effing dead. So sort of just one more sort of color witness, but doesn't really bring a whole lot to the case. Then there's Francis Walsh, who's another relatively short witness, also a firefighter in Canton. Said it was snowing a lot and windy, which is pretty obvious from the video. He only remembered Karen asking if John was alive. So Karen everybody says she's hysterical. She's kind of all over the place. It seems like different people are hearing different parts of what she says because different people are consistent with each other, but they're not all consistent. And he seems to be one who briefly heard her ask if he was alive, and that's something other people heard as well. But he didn't hear, for instance, he's dead, and he didn't hear I hit him. He didn't hear any of that stuff. He just heard that question. And he's the engine driver, so he saw a lot less than the rest. Which brings us to Katie McLaughlin, who is another person, unlike Flamati, who is presented, I mean, the defense attempts to undermine him, but can't do a lot with him because he doesn't really have any connection. McLaughlin, they're going to try and make sort of part of the conspiracy, part of this group of people who are conspiring together. Now, she is a firefighter paramedic for the town of Canton. She testified that Reed was very upset and distraught. Katie tried to get basic demo info from Karen, demographics and other things. Any information about how John ended up where he was, did he have medical problems, did he take medications, all the things you would expect a paramedic to want to know when treating someone. Karen did tell her who John was and his birthday and did give her some initial information. Karen asked if there had been any significant trauma, and that was when Karen said that she hit him. There was another woman there who told her to calm down, which would either be, well, we'll figure out who it is later because I'm sure they'll testify about it, and that she was hysterical. A police officer apparently was nearby and said, "You what?" And Karen repeated that she hit him, and the officer told someone to get Goody down here. We're going to hear from Officer Good later, or Sergeant Good, who is one of the investigators. Katie assumed that meant the sergeant. Katie said she didn't follow up as the police officer had heard what was said, and it didn't seem to be important to the treatment, at least. Based on Karen's demeanor, Katie thought at this point there was no real point in continuing this conversation because she was hysterical, so she went back to the ambulance to help with patient care. Katie said that John was wearing jeans, a zip-up jacket, and one sneaker. Now, cross-examination, the defense showed a photo that had Katie, Karen to her right, a woman to her left, and a police officer nearby, which was interesting because it pretty much confirmed her early description of the scene and who all was around when Karen would have said this. Now, the defense noted that the first time Katie made an official report on this statement was January 30th. But two things about that. Number one, Katie noted that the first time it was made to a police officer in her presence was actually at the time that Karen said it. And also note that January 30th is the next day. So it's not as if Katie waited a long time to tell this. This isn't a LaFoon situation where 15 months later she walks in the prosecution's office and says, "Oh, by the way, Karen Reed said she hit her." Now, the defense says that Katie told Trooper Proctor, who is our lead investigator, who's going to play a big role in this, that the statement was made to the woman, not her. Now, the defense is very good at trying to pick out inconsistencies. This is a relatively minor inconsistency. These people are all standing around together. Whether I hit her was made in the direction of the woman or in the direction of Katie or in the direction of the officer isn't really all that important. Katie says it was in response to something that she had asked, but Karen was looking at the woman at the time when she made the statement. Now, there's one thing that I thought was interesting, just for those of you who enjoyed our hearsay episodes. The defense actually elicits hearsay through a leading question, asking Katie, "Are you aware that the woman said Karen said X, Y, and Z?" This, of course, is Karen's statement, offered for the truth of the matter asserted, told by a second person, offered for the truth of the matter asserted, to someone else, presumably a police officer, who now the defense is referencing. That is not objected to, which surprised me because that's a lot of hearsay all wrapped into one. But
you remember what we say, though? Hearsay, the thing with hearsay is if it's not objected to and no one, like the judge doesn't say you can't testify to hearsay, it comes in. That's the crazy thing. So actually it could be strategic when you don't object to hearsay. Like you're like, well, I want to know what it is and it might be good for me.
And Katie, of course, didn't know this because she's not privy to what the person said to the person. Right. But whatever. It was just a way for the defense to get that statement in and, without having to put that person on the stand. And it worked because it wasn't objected to. So Katie went on to say that she told firefighter Nettle and Flamati that Reed said she hit John. Asked if she wrote a report, and Katie said that in this scenario, she was not a report writer. And the defense is trying to use the tried and true report writing technique that you use on police, but it doesn't work as well with firefighters and first responders because their job is not really to gather evidence of a crime. Guys, we're so excited to talk about one of our favorite sponsors, Babbel. A lot of you guys want to learn a language. I understand it's something that I'm interested in doing as well, but only 1 in 5 Americans have done it. Learn a new language is on everybody's bucket list. And if that's you, make 2024 the year you finally check it off the list with Babbel. You can be better and a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you to speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. And Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world.
Babbel has these convenient courses that really help you learn real life conversation skills in a different language. I speak multiple languages, but honestly, I forget how to do simple things like ask for directions or order food if I don't use it every day. But you guys know I love to travel. Well, when I'm about to travel to another country, I pull up Babbel's convenient courses that help me remember how to order food. And not just that, to make sure I have the right pronunciation and accent for the region that I am going to with their interaction with speech recognition technology. That is such a cool tool. And you know what? It works. People actually understand me when I go on vacation. I really love how easy Babbel has made learning another language. Here's a special limited time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/prosecutors. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/prosecutors, spelled BABBEL.com/prosecutors. Rules and restrictions may apply. This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Huggies knows that babies come in all shapes and sizes, and their tushies do too. Huggies Little Movers with its curved and stretchy fit. Moms know that there's nothing worse than an ill-fitting diaper, especially for your active babies. I love Huggies because I can rely on them to keep my baby covered while she moves around. You guys have heard about my sweet little baby. She just turned 1, deep into mobility. I am so excited about Huggies Little Movers because she can roll around, jump around, climb, which is everything she's doing. And I know that she is covered, and so am I in the cleanup.
And we all want the very best for our babies, and that's Huggies. Huggies Little Movers are curved, so babies feel comfy no matter how much they're moving around. And they're moving around a lot. They also offer up to 12-hour protection against leaks, which is a game changer. Get your baby's butt into Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby.
So the defense continued to focus on Katie. So their questioning now turns to whether Katie knew Caitlin Albert. Caitlin is the daughter of Brian Albert, and she was at the house the night John was killed. This whole point of this part of the cross-examination is to basically show why Katie would have loyalties to the Alberts to have buy-in to be a part of this conspiracy. So she testifies that she did go to high school with Caitlin Albert and that they were acquaintances. They saw each other on occasion because of their mutual friends. They lived in the same town. They essentially grew up together, but they weren't particularly close. This is not someone you call to go bury a body, so to speak, right? They would not hang out one-on-one, said Katie. This is one of the many sidebars that happen. So outside of the presence of sidebar, is am I saying it right?
Sidebar. You're doing it right.
Sidebar. Sidebar. Outside the presence of the jury, the defense further questioned Katie. And the reason this is a sidebar, by the way, is because they're trying to bring in evidence, I think pictures, that they had not previously shown the prosecution. So this is, you can absolutely object to this because you can't have last minute, kind of surprise elements. So this is why everything's happening outside of the jury. It's not because of some legal thing. This is late produced. We haven't had a chance to look at this. We haven't had a chance to decide if we want to object to this. So outside the presence of the jury, the defense further questions Katie. And this can happen where a witness is still on the stand and she is answering questions, but the jury's not hearing this. And the purpose of this is for the judge to see what the questions are, if it's going to be relevant, and having to make kind of these decisions on the spot without prejudicing the jury who would have heard the testimony. And in that case, it's hard to get them to unhear what they've heard.
We had a whole day of this in Murdaugh, you may recall, where we did like a whole day of testimony about all the stuff Murdaugh had done financially. And then the judge had to decide what to let in front of the jury. And that's basically what's happening here.
Yeah. So there's all these pictures, and the purpose of these pictures is to show how close Caitlin and Katie are. Of course, the prosecution, as they should, because they hadn't seen these photos previously, object to them. And so this questioning is going to whether the prosecution's objections to this evidence should be sustained or overruled. So the defense shows a picture to Katie of Caitlin's Facebook page listing Katie as one of Caitlin's friends. I don't like to call people out on their ages typically because I am also getting up in my age as well. But this was definitely a boomer moment because I was like, really? How many friends do most people have? And the fact that you are friends with someone on Facebook could mean nothing, right? I've accepted friends where I'm like, did we go to high school together? I'm not sure. And I'm friends with a lot of
everybody
people.
For all of you who I'm friends with on Facebook. Every one of you.
I was going to say, especially if you like had a common connection, like you went to high school together. I think I'm friends with like maybe 1,000 people I went to high school with whom I haven't spoken with in decades, right? So this was, I thought, incredibly weak. It wasn't like they listed each other as cousins, you know, or like sister from another mister sort of situation. It was straight up, they are friends on Facebook. But it does get better. It does get better than that. I just thought that was a very weak sort of thing, even though the defense really harped on it and wanted it to be significant. They then move on to, I think, better evidence of them being friends. They show a photo of a bunch of people together, and it includes Caitlin and Katie in this picture, but it wasn't just the two of them. It was a lot of people. Katie looks at the photo, and she says she doesn't recall when or where it was taken, though it appeared to be from around 2014, 10 years ago. Probably close in time to when they graduated high school, or at least 10 years in time closer to when they graduated from high school. After showing yet another photograph, which Katie, again, didn't really particularly remember, which had about 12 people in it, again, big group of people with both Katie and Caitlin in it, the defense pulls out yet another photo, and this one, again, includes both Katie and Caitlin. And the defense takes a close-up of this photo. It shows Katie and Caitlin in bathing suits with Caitlin's arm around her and Caitlin drinking a beer. What it looks like is like, again, probably a bigger group photo, and they focus in on the fact that they're next to each other. Probably it's some gathering, party, event, whatever. Bathing suits, beers, hanging out. This was not, it did not have any gotcha moments for me where it was like so clear that they were the call me if you have to bury a body sort of situation. They were clearly in the same group of friends, acquaintances, all things that Katie actually testified to. So after this voir dire, and this is what it's called when Katie's being questioned outside of the presence of the jury, the judge sustains the prosecution's objection to these photographs since they were not shown to the prosecution ahead of time and didn't really elicit value to Katie's testimony. But the judge does allow the defense to ask questions about the relationship between Katie and Caitlin, but can't show these photos and can't really delve too deeply into it because we're kind of getting into the realm of irrelevance. The defense essentially asks questions about the pictures without showing them, which really skirts the line of the judge's sustaining of the objection, but they do it.
She shouldn't have sustained the objection if she was going to allow those questions because it was just weird to ask questions. Are you aware there's a photograph of you in a bathing suit with your arm around? It's like, what are we doing? Anyway.
I agree. I mean, it's confusing. We know what's going on, but the jury doesn't. And essentially by asking those questions, then everyone's thinking, well, is there a photo? I guess there is a photo. And the whole point was you don't get to show the photos. But anyway, on redirect, the prosecution notes that the civil service, remember Katie is in the civil service here, like many towns, they give you like extra credit for serving in your own hometown. right? You don't want a brain drain, or what it's called when people leave their town. They want to draw people back to their hometown where they're invested and raise their families back in their hometown. And so the fact that Katie is from this town, comes back, gets extra credit, you know, in her civil service for serving here, it is not surprising that she knows or is acquainted with people who she responds to on her calls in her job.
And let me just say, I thought there are going to be parts of this conspiracy the defense does a pretty good job with. I thought this was a mistake because, to me at least, this whole series of questions made me doubt the conspiracy from the very beginning, because there was no... She went to high school with the girl. The last time they were together was at somebody's baby shower 4 years ago. Is she really, based on that, the next day going to tell police that this woman who she doesn't know said that she hit a man who died to protect someone from her high school? Is she really going to do that? Is that really believable? You know, the defense spent so much time on, because basically she said, well, I think we're more of acquaintances than friends. We're not close friends. And the defense just kept hammering on this. It's like, guys, this is all you've got is some photos of her and a bunch of friends at the beach drinking beers. That's all you got from when they were like high school. And you could explain what Karen Read is saying, just accept that she said that, and she's hysterical. He's dead. She doesn't know what happened. The only thing she can imagine is that somehow when she dropped him off the day before, she hit him, and now she's crushed by guilt. And only later did she realize that no, in fact, the Alberts did this. They're the ones responsible, not her. But you could have just done that, and you could have explained this away. But instead, you try and wrap this into the conspiracy. And so what you're doing is you're expanding this conspiracy. Like, this conspiracy at its broadest point is huge, because this would mean you've got the Canton firefighters who are involved as well, through Katie McLaughlin, who has influenced other members of the firefighting group to agree with her to repeat this testimony, to perjure themselves and say that they heard Karen Read say this, or she's subtly manipulated their minds until they believe this happened. And that is, of all the things they're going to say, the least believable part of the conspiracy. And by having that weak link in the conspiracy that I don't even think you need, it undermines a lot of your future, much better evidence of a conspiracy. So that brings us to Greg Woodbury. He is also a member of the Canton Fire Department. He says that the police were there when they arrived. John was laying on his back in the snow. In fact, he was covered with snow, as was the area around him. CPR had been begun, but John had no breathing and no pulse. They put John in the ambulance, and after, McLaughlin entered the ambulance and told them someone said she had hit him. Hugely important, right? Because now you've got Greg Woodbury, right after you've got the defense accusing them all of being involved in this conspiracy, of essentially, and remember, the rule has been invoked, so he's not supposed to be in there when Katie is testifying. He's not supposed to know what she said. He is now confirming that immediately after seeing Karen and hearing this, Katie said this to them, not even the next day, immediately, which means either the conspiracy got going really fast and Katie somehow was wrapped up in that conspiracy very quickly, or that's just what she heard her say. Either way, so he says that later that day, Woodbury would be called back to Fairview Road to conduct something called a Section 12, which is what they call it in Massachusetts when someone appears to be suffering from a psychological issue. There's going to be a lot of testimony about this and about whether or not Karen Read was exhibiting sort of maybe potentially suicidal tendencies, which once again doesn't really tell you a whole lot about whether she did it or didn't do it, but is a fact of this case. Reed did not want to go to the hospital at that time, but she kept repeating, "Is he dead? Is he dead?"
So another paramedic firefighter for Canton testifies, and it's Daniel Whitley. So Whitley testifies that he nearly slid off the road going to the Section 12 call that he worked on with Woodbury. And he did so because it was snowing so badly, as we've already seen in the dash cams. And a lot of people, everyone is going to talk about how bad the weather was. Now, he testifies that Karen talked about not wanting to live anymore. It makes sense that this is part of his testimony because Whitley is there specifically for the Section 12 to help out, to see if there's a psych issue going on, if Karen Read needs to be held for any sort of mental issue. So Karen talks about not wanting to live anymore if her husband dies. That's what Whitley testifies to, which honestly they thought didn't really rise to the level of Section 12, but was actually part of the normal grieving process, the shock of seeing someone that you love or in a relationship with dead in front of you. And also, kind of confirming what Woodbury said, Whitley says that Karen kept asking if John was alive or dead. And also went on to ask how long someone could live in the snow. That's important because if the prosecution's theory is that Karen hit him hours earlier, then how long he's in the snow is relevant. And it shows kind of that intent of knowing that she actually hit him back then and that he was in the snow for many hours. And Whitley would also testify that Karen kept going from crying to all of a sudden being perky, like perking up, being okay, then crying, which honestly is probably also part of the grieving process, part of the shock. And he testifies that Karen is crying about having to take care of kids and that she couldn't do it alone. It was too much. And he said that she did have a good support system. And she asked if he knew Carrie Roberts. Now, Whitley responded yes and just said that Carrie Roberts was nice. And she said anyone who knew Carrie Roberts wouldn't say that, which is kind of a strange thing to say at that time. And Whitley testified that it kind of shocked him that at this moment, with John O'Keefe, lying lifeless in front of him, she raises Carrie Roberts and says, if you really knew her, you wouldn't say she's nice. Whitley goes on to say that Karen kind of goes from being despondent to snarky when she's asked about Carrie Roberts. Now, this is objected to because it's not relevant, and the court ultimately strikes the part about him talking about Karen being snarky.
So then Jason Becker testifies. He went with Whitley to the Section 12, which, by the way, it was her dad who called him with concerns about Karen that led to the Section 12 in the first place. The main point of this witness was that Reed was upset that the last interaction she had with John was that she got into an argument with him. She also at one point asked if she could have hit him, which is different from I did hit him. Like, could I have hit him? And it's something the defense tries to focus on as maybe what she said to everyone. There was an unusual back and forth with the defense about whether Becker initially said that Reed had denied taking drugs or alcohol, but then admitted to drinking alcohol. I didn't really understand why this was particularly helpful for the defense to bring this out, because Becker didn't really seem like a guy who's trying to hurt Karen, and getting more testimony about her drinking isn't necessarily a good thing. By this point, you can sort of see the development of the prosecution's story here. So you have Karen, she's driving John over to this house. They get into some sort of argument. She hits him with a vehicle and leaves. Then, at some point later, she comes back. She realizes he's dead. She's overcome with grief and guilt, and she starts telling everybody she can talk to, I hit him. That's the theory the prosecution's starting to build here. And they've managed to do it with various different people, most of whom aren't really related to the supposed conspirators at all, with the exception of Katie McLaughlin, whose story is corroborated by other people who are not, who you wouldn't think would be part of this conspiracy. But given how broadly you think this conspiracy goes, maybe are in order to help Katie and to protect her. They're willing to lie about Karen. I will say this. If this turns out to be a conspiracy, get yourself some friends like the people in Canton have, because they have apparently built like a tight-knit community that will defend each other against outsiders, even when the connections between them are relatively limited. If you buy the sort of full-scale conspiracy, as I've said before, I thought this was a really weak part in the defense, and they should have kind of let this go.
So next, Paul Gallagher testifies. He's from the Canton Police Department, and he's a lieutenant. He arrived shortly after 7 a.m., and even though that's the morning, it's still very dark and very windy, still part of this snowstorm that's happening. At this point, John has been taken away. He's not on the scene anymore. And he testifies that it's snowing heavily, at least 4 inches of snow, making it a unique and difficult scene to process. He testified that there were light pink spots in the snow, which which they thought might be blood, and they wanted to process the scene, but they never had to do it with so much snow. So to try and kind of deal with all the snow that was already on the ground and collecting, they get a leaf blower to remove some of the snow, which is kind of difficult because that's probably going to blow away some evidence too. But look, I've been in nor'easters, and I don't know. However you can get rid of that snow, I get it.
And look, I mean, this is a point some people have raised, like, oh, you could have damaged the scene or whatever. And I feel like sometimes, I think we all know what the CSI effect is, but we still fall into it. This is the real world. And in the real world, when you're trying to collect evidence in the middle of a blizzard, some things are going to have to be done that you would prefer not to do. You're going to have to do some things that may lose you some evidence, may contaminate some evidence, to try and get whatever you can and save the scene. This is awful. The wind is howling. The snow is coming down. They got this blood in the snow, what they think is blood in the snow. At some point, the snow is going to melt, and then that's going to be gone. And they want to see what's underneath the snow.
Like
what
a knife or a gun or maybe someone's wallet that he was on. You know, I mean, you don't know what it is.
Dig? Would that be better? If they get out shovels and started digging through the snow, would that be less contaminated?
Have you ever, I think I've told this story before, but it's worth telling here. My very first snowstorm in Connecticut, I didn't know you had to dig out your car while the snow was still falling because it's a lot of work. So I waited to the next morning, and it was 10 hours later, not that long. And my car was completely covered. It was like this type of snow, right? When I looked outside, there were at least 4 inches of snow already. And I was like, I'll just get it in the morning. It's dark outside. I don't want to go outside and below, in the teens and shovel. In the morning, my car was completely covered up to the windshield, like halfway up the windshield with snow, and it had frozen overnight. And my car was frozen for the rest of winter. I didn't get access to my car for 3.5 months. That may happen here, right? This is a nor'easter. If they waited, it could freeze or it could melt later. There's actually so much that could happen. And so there are kind of extreme measures, and you're thinking on the spot, what can we do? We have a man who is at the hospital, might be dead, but we're trying to process the scene in the midst of this storm.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to criticize this, feel free. But the man in the arena was having to come up with something pretty quickly to try and get whatever he could out of this scene where a cop's just been found dead. And frankly, I just don't have a lot of time for people who want to criticize stuff like this when these officers are doing the best they can. There's no reason to think Paul Gallagher showed up, decided, I'm going to ruin this scene and save whoever actually killed John O'Keefe. I think he's just doing the best he can. And like I said, if you want to criticize it, if you can come up with a better way to do it right now, sitting in your warm home, okay, good for you. Maybe you should send that to every police department in the Northeast so they'll have that information.
And here's the thing. Gallagher addresses this. He said that it's not like he just was like, let's get a leaf blower and blow away all the evidence. He's saying, I'd actually seen someone use this tactic before in processing a scene when there was a lot of snow. So it's 7 a.m. We're trying to figure out what to do. And I'm like, you know what? I saw someone do this before. So I grabbed a leaf blower. Makes sense, right? It's not something he made up on the spot. He'd seen it done before. In any event, it happened, right? It did happen, and that's part of what you have to deal with. And the police took pictures of footprints in the snow and what they thought might be blood. But at this point, the winds were so high, they couldn't put up a tent to kind of preserve the crime scene. And the situation was extremely difficult. Honestly, this makes me think of like Dyatlov Pass, where they couldn't get their tent put up because the wind was so strong. Similar here, right? This is not a controlled environment whatsoever. So then a video was played with Gallagher, Sergeant Lank, and Sergeant Good assisting him. In this video, you see them remove the snow layer by layer with the leaf blower. They're not just like blasting it. They're trying to kind of go through each layer because as the snow falls, evidence may be, kind of in between the snow. You're trying to see if each layer has something that is worth getting. That's what they're trying to do.
And let me just say this. If you haven't seen this, watch it. Because actually, it was really effective. When they did it, it was kind of like amazing because you start to see the blood come out more and more. I don't know. I expected it to be a lot more sort of chaotic. Exactly.
You know what I mean? I thought it was going to be like when my kids take the leaf blower and like things go everywhere. Rather, it's kind of like essentially trying to dust if you had like a broom and you're dusting each layer, because that's exactly what happens in a snowfall, right? Things are covered up and it's quite literally layering on top of each other. So trying to remove layer and layer of snow to see what's underneath, and they do uncover things. And what you see in this video is they expose pieces of broken cocktail glass, and the light pink spots begin to turn dark red as they remove the upper layers of snow. So, I mean, I thought this was really interesting because it undercuts a lot of people's arguments that the leaf blower was a terrible idea. I'm not exactly sure with a shovel how you'd be able to do this same level of uncovering this evidence. So that's all they saw at that point, were the light pink spots turning dark red and the cocktail glass broken pieces. But the scene continues to deteriorate, and it's obviously an unusual scene. The officers asked a neighbor for some red Solo cups. Red Solo cups are going to be like the icon picture, whatever you want to call it, of this case, right? Because they want to put the apparent blood samples in these cups, like to scoop it up and preserve it, because they are, again, kind of in this unwieldy situation. So they do that, and they bag and seal these red Solo cups with apparent blood samples in them. The defense would make hay of this, noting these were the same kind of cups you would use to drink beer at a barbecue in, basically saying like how unprofessional this is, that they're treating a crime scene like a beer pong game. Homes.com knows when it comes to home shopping, it's never just about the house or condo. It's about the home. And what makes a home is more than just the house or property. It's the location and neighborhood. If you have kids, it's also schools, nearby parks, and transportation options. That's why Homes.com goes above and beyond to bring home shoppers the in-depth information they need to find the right home.
And when I say in-depth, I'm talking deep. Each listing features comprehensive information about the neighborhood, complete with a video guide. They also have details about local schools with test scores, state rankings, and student-to-teacher ratio. They even have an agent directory with the sales history of each agent. So, when it comes to finding a home, not just a house, this is everything you need to know all in one place. Homes.com. We've done your homework.
Gallagher acknowledged that this was unusual, but stated that nothing at the scene was standard. The defense would then go on to show photographs taken by police of the Solo cups in the Sallyport, where the vehicle was also being kept. The defense suggests that this could have led to inadvertent cross-contamination or intentionally putting blood on the vehicle, though you have to wonder why you do that and then document it with police photographs. Like if you were trying to contaminate your evidence, you try to do that in secret and not do it as part of your police evidence. So they did the best they could with the leaf blower and the Solo red cups, but the defense, obviously in their cross-examination, is trying to show that this is all unusual, making fun of the police. And this is kind of strange because the whole red Solo cup is less towards the conspiracy and more towards how incompetent the police are. But they're so incompetent that they're able to pull off a very complex conspiracy.
Right. I guess I should ask the neighbor for Tupperware. Something they could like plop the top on. I mean, look, if I were in Canton or the Boston Police Department, I probably would try and have some sort of evidence collection tool that you could use in a situation like this, where you can collect snow essentially before it melts and keep it. Yeah. They probably should have had that, you know? I mean, the defense is all like, did you go back and get flags? And they're like, no, we didn't go back and get flags. And it's one of those things where criticize it if you want, but I think it was better than leaving it there to melt, to me. And, you know, maybe you're worried about cross-contamination. I understand the sort of intentional, like the idea that someone could have gone into the Sallyport and got one of the cups of blood out and dabbed it on her bumper to try and show, to further the conspiracy, which is what, once again, I mean, that's the whole point of this, right? Like, we're not the ones making this up. If you hear that and you think, that's ridiculous, I can't believe they would try and say that's what the defense is trying to say. That is what the defense is trying to say, is that gave the ability for someone to do that. The cross-contamination is a little less problematic as far as like, I mean, I'm not exactly sure. Like the Solo cups might have had unknown DNA. It seems like that actually would be better for Karen. Like I can't imagine a situation in which you got the Solo cups from the neighbors, collected the blood, and it ended up being bad for Karen Read. It's very unlikely that Karen Read, for instance, her DNA is going to be in that cup. But there might be all sorts of random DNA in there. And then you test it and you're like, man, got all these potential people who maybe were involved with this. And their DNA is mixed with John's blood, right?
Like it would be bad if they went into Karen's car and took a bunch of red Solo cups in the back of her car that she had thrown back there to use to collect it, right? Then you can kind of understand they're like trying to plant her, DNA on it or something.
Yeah. And somebody in the chat says, well, maybe a local pharmacy was open. It was the middle of a blizzard at 6 o'clock in the morning. Maybe it was, or maybe it wasn't. I mean,
and remember, the snow's still coming down. They could very well lose that blood. And maybe their thinking is maybe this is contaminated, but maybe we'll be able to save something. Like there could be nothing left, but you have to make a decision at that moment or you lose the opportunity altogether. We see this in all the other cases. John Bonet, whatever. They're like, why couldn't they have preserved more DNA, right? Who cares if it's contaminated? Like that might be the one shred of evidence that could break the case wide open if we have genetic genealogy, whatever, right? They're just thinking preserve everything while we still can in the midst of a blizzard. Things might melt, things might fall. We may literally lose this like potential blood in the middle of snow that was buried until we snow blowed it or leaf blew it. What's the past tense of that?
Yeah, and look, it's one of those things where it's very easy. And look, if I was the defense attorney, I would be doing everything they did with this. I would be like, so you're telling me that this is the best evidence you've got, and you got a snow blower blowing everything all over the place, and then you go get some Solo cups, probably from the party they had last night, probably already still had beer in them, and you're scooping up blood, and you think that works for a police investigation. I mean, of course you're going to say that. It's so easy to do, but I kind of feel like when you sit back and think about it, like, well, I mean, okay, not great. And the officer admitted that. This was not perfect. This is not what you would do if you were at the training room and they were training you on how to secure a scene. But it is what happened either way, and it is something that the defense is going to make hay of. So they take the blood samples to the station. At this point, Officer Lank and Gallagher, they return to the scene. It's around 9 a.m. now. They go into the residence through a sliding door. There were 5 or 6 people there, including the Alberts. This included Brian Albert, who was a Boston police officer, as we've told you before. He is someone that Gallagher knew. He also knew Brian Higgins, who was the ATF agent, but he did not recall him being there at that time. So they also talked about the search warrant and the removal of the rear tail light of Karen's Lexus. This occurred around 9:50 that morning. There's video of this from the Sallyport where the vehicle was taken. The SUV got there on January 29th and stayed there until February 1st when the state police arrived to process it. On cross-examination, in addition to the Solo cups and general complaints about how the investigation was conducted, which you can expect, the defense noted that Gallagher didn't take any notes, was never interviewed by the lead investigator or anyone else until April 3rd, 2024. I also noted that Officer Lank, who took the initial statements from the Alberts, was friendly with the family. Gallagher was also asked about getting a search warrant for the home, which he did not do. Gallagher said there was no probable cause for such a warrant, and that the decision had nothing to do with Albert being a Boston police officer. After Gallagher returned to the station that day, he had a discussion with the chief about limiting local officers' involvement in the investigation, since this was a Boston police officer dead on another Boston police officer's lawn, and Brian Albert's brother Kevin was a detective with the Canton Police. This is eventually going to lead to the state police taking over this case, though, as we talked about earlier, that is not going to end the problems with the police investigation. In fact, it may make them worse. The state police investigation is going to end up being a pretty big problem for the prosecution, as we'll get to later on.
So next on the stand is Sean Good, another Canton police sergeant who was on the scene that day. He testifies that Carrie Roberts had actually called in around 5 a.m. that morning asking if the police had locked up anyone matching John's description since his girlfriend was worried about him. When Good arrived at the scene, he testified that it was snowing terribly, something we keep hearing from everyone and is absolutely the case. And he said that Karen was running around yelling, "Is he dead?" After leaving the scene, Karen's father called and told police he was afraid that his daughter Karen wanted to end her life, hence setting up the Section 12 hold. Now, on cross-examination, the defense continued to press the fact that everyone in this case knows each other. They kind of dig into the fact that Good went to high school with the sister of State Trooper Michael Proctor, who is the lead investigator and problematic, as we will know later on, based on his many text messages about Karen Read. And he's also the sister, and also is close to the sister-in-law of Chris Albert, who was the brother of Brian Albert, the house where John O'Keefe was found outside of. And of course, they also dig into the fact that Good worked with Kevin Albert. Now, Good did not hear Karen say that she hit John. Remember, all he testified to was that she kept saying, "Is he dead?" Officer Good was asked about his report and the fact that a photo was later added to the report that was not at the time of the writing of the report. Good says that's really not unusual, and it's not unusual. You try to write these reports because you have lots of reports to write, and if you process your photos after the fact, think about your own photos, actually. Like, I take lots of photos, and it takes me a long time to go process it. When you're organizing your files, you may add it to the report, and that's what happened here. But the defense, again, is trying to basically have Good be part of the conspiracy and adding things that would frame Karen after the fact, and this picture is part of their narrative. Good is also asked on cross-examination about a time when Brian Albert's brother was charged with a hit and run. This was back in 2009, and after the finding the relevant vehicle at the very same house, 34 Fairview. This case was subsequently dismissed, and when the defense asked the question about the dismissal, the Commonwealth objected, and this objection was sustained, though one wonders how evidence that the police put together a case against one of the Alberts that was subsequently dismissed by prosecutors actually helps Read to establish a police conspiracy here. So I think we were kind of going down a tangent here, but it's not even clear how this testimony, if allowed by the judge, would have helped the narrative that Karen was framed.
Yeah, and there's a couple things about Good's testimony that, once again, if he's in on the conspiracy, you think he would say that he heard her say that she hit him. You would think that he would say that, but you don't have that. And then, you do have this whole series of questions about a time that the police put together a case. The police are not the ones who dismiss something. That's the prosecutor. Can be done for any number of reasons. Lots of different reasons. And I'll just go ahead and tell you, for whatever reason, in state prosecutions, most of them never go to trial. Even after they're indicted, they go away for whatever reason. Maybe some prosecutor was doing this guy a favor because he's a cop or because he's friends with cops. No idea. But the police put the case together. They didn't bury it. They didn't cover it up. They didn't create a conspiracy about how really it was the other guy's fault. Like, they followed the evidence and they put together a case on one of the Alberts. I think that says something. I mean, it's a relatively minor point.
It. I'll say that much.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. They did not bury it in a case that would be much easier to bury than one where a dead guy's on the lawn.
And they looked for the car. You would think if the conspiracy was to let him off, you wouldn't even go look for the car. You'd be like, hit and runs are hard, man. Never found the car. Like, they actually found the car. There may be evidence for it, not for it. Who knows? Maybe there was some pretrial deal. We've talked about pretrial deals where if you've not had any other criminal records before, you're kind of like on probation, but then it's essentially like expunged. It's dismissed. There's no actual real charges if you keep your nose clean for a certain amount of time. I don't know if that happened here or not, but I would think the conspiracy argument is stronger if they never went and found the car. But like, everyone in the neighborhood knew that the car was clearly damaged and was sitting at 34 Fairview. No, the police actually went to go find it. They found it and they documented it.
Yeah, if a cop had found that car and, pulled a Adnan Syed and moved it somewhere and dumped it, and then had somebody else lead him to the car and be like, well, who knows whose this is? That would be pretty powerful. Like, if the defense could show that happened, then you'd be like, okay, they've done this before. They have protected these people before, and now they're doing it again. But that's not what you see here. So, I don't know. Take of it what you will, and that's all you can do, and that's all the jury can do. Okay, so next time we're going to get into Michael Lank, who was sort of the most involved officer in the investigation. We talked about several officers up to this point, but he's going to be important, and he's going to talk a lot about his connections to the Alberts and various things that happened during the investigation, as well as why we've mentioned this a little bit with Gallagher, but we're going to talk some about search warrants, probable cause, that kind of thing in the next episode. And then we're going to start moving into the people who knew John and were there the night this happened. We're going to get into all those people who ended up back at the Albert household, the McCabe's, the Alberts friends, John, well, depending on who you believe, all those folks and what happened that night, and really start to get into this story of how John ended up in the snow. So basically, if you're thinking about the prosecution's case, they did their sort of timeline thing where they talked about the finding of the body and everybody who was involved in that and the police officers who were involved in that. Now we're going to take a step back. I'm going to go back 24 hours, and we're going to start talking about what led up to the finding of the body. And we're going to hear from a lot of people who, if the defense theory is correct, are either murderers or accessories to murder. A lot of them, pretty much every one of them, had to either know what happened or be directly involved in what happened. And we'll have fun discussing that with you, though I will say, as always, if you get the opportunity to listen to these folks' testimony, do it. I think so much. I mean, one reason we have trials the way we do, we don't rely on written records or, depositions or affidavits, is because seeing the person talk, listening to what they say, seeing how they respond to questions is so important, because people do lie, and you want to know, is this person lying to me or not? Particularly if you think that person might be involved in the crime. So watch them yourself, judge the credibility for yourself. We'll give you our opinions, but they're just our opinions, and that's all they are. Okay, I know you guys already have thoughts about this case. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media, though at this point I'm boycotting this case on social media. So maybe if you reach out there, you won't hear anything. Thanks to everyone who joined us again for this case on our Patreon page. This is like the third episode of this we've recorded this week. We've recorded a bunch this week.
We've recorded a lot.
Get a little bit ahead.
We're trying to get ahead. Yeah,
so we appreciate you guys spending all this time talking to us and hanging out with us. If you want to be a part of these live recordings, join our Patreon, and hello to all of those of you watching this video on YouTube. Well, Alice, before we sign off for tonight, I'm tired, so I think we're going to skip questions for tonight. But before we sign off for tonight, do you have anything else to say?
No, I think everything you said about being able to watch it yourself is just important. You don't have to watch all hundreds of hours of the trial. But I think it's important, especially on some of these key cross-examinations where the cross-examination is trying to point to involvement in a conspiracy, is to see how these kind of confrontational questions and implications, these are big implications to put on someone that they're part of a criminal conspiracy, how they respond to it. If they get emotional, if they get defensive, and judge for yourself what you think is happening. And also think, if you think something is inconsistent in your mind, like what we talked about earlier, where the police is so incompetent, they're using solo cups, to being able to organize a multi-agency, dozens of people conspiracy in order to cover up the death of a fellow police officer. Not say it can't happen, but when there are those inconsistencies, don't suspend reality. The whole point is to take your experience and decide whether this is a believable, real life situation. And if you have doubts about it, ask questions. And you're going to maybe ping pong back and forth between witnesses. But think about what it takes to be able to get multiple people's story straight. We covered Robert Wong's story, where we concluded that there were 3 people in that house who probably got their story straight when they spoke to the police, and how difficult it is to keep a secret among 3 people. We're not talking about a secret among 3 people. We're talking about a pretty complex cover-up that took place almost immediately as soon as the body was found at 6:30 a.m. And all of these people are having to testify without the benefit of having seen their other alleged co-conspirators testify. And how disjointed you may think that type of conspiracy testimony would be among dozens of people. And if you see that, and if not, how did they pull it off? How did they pull it off by basically 6:45 a.m. among multiple people who were not even on the scene yet?
And I think, just one other thing on this, because I feel like a lot of people feel weird about this case, and you have an unusual feeling about this case. And we often say, follow your gut. So if you have an unusual feeling about this case, don't just ignore that. Think about why you do, but also think about this. One problem whenever you have the defense trying to make out the conspiracy, we charge conspiracy. It's a crime. And when we do it, we have to lay out exactly how the conspiracy happened, exactly who the participants were, what the things they did as part of that conspiracy are, what their overarching plan was, when they came to an agreement. We have to prove all that. The defense is offering a conspiracy. They don't have to prove anything. They're just offering sort of the possibility. They're getting your mind going, imagining like how this could have gone down with a conspiracy. One thing I think probably is good to do, particularly in a case like this, as we said earlier, the defenses, because they're doing that, they really are painting a pretty broad picture here. They got Katie McLaughlin involved in the conspiracy, or at least they're offering you the potential that she is. Sit down with the evidence and think about what is the smallest the conspiracy could be for it to work. What are the fewest amount of people possible for this conspiracy to work? And think about all the different angles and what the conspiracy has to do and what it has to explain for this to work. I think that's a pretty valuable exercise. If you can get the number down pretty small, then it's more likely. Like if you can get it down to 1 or 2 or 3 people, even maybe a little bit more than that, then I think it becomes more and more likely. The smaller you can get the conspiracy, the better. If it has to be a big one, if it has to involve 10, 12, 20 people from all these different agencies, that is hard to buy. I mean, you're going to have to, as we've said before, extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. Like you're going to need a lot more evidence than just the police are corrupt and incompetent, which they may very well be. And I think one thing about this case is if you live in Massachusetts, you've lived through a lot of police corruption and incompetence lately. And so you are primed to believe that that could have happened in this case. And I totally get that. But the smaller you can get that conspiracy, the better. So think about that. And I would be interested to hear if you guys out there have done that. Send me sort of your best story of how this went down with the conspiracy and who's involved. And I'll be happy to share it later on when we sort of get into theories.
And one question that just kept like coming to my mind from the very beginning. See if you can, maybe you guys have a great answer for this. But if all of these people, even if you can get it down to a small group to carry out this pretty complex conspiracy, and I say complex because it's going to involve at least more than one agency and at least more than family members, right? Why they would place the body in the yard of a police officer. You get to plan your conspiracy from the beginning. There are lots of dump sites in general, and it makes it really difficult to run away from involvement in something when it's pretty close to your house. So,
I mean, if they just dumped him like 5 more feet to the left, he'd have been in somebody else's yard. I mean, it was literally right on the property
or across
line.
the street, right?
Or
I mean,
truly,
yeah. When the thing about the conspiracy is you get to plan the parts of it, including where the body ends up. So why did these conspirators who investigate crimes and are part of, this is what they do, is investigate crimes, why would they choose this to be the dump spot? This has befuddled me in the conspiracy narrative from the very beginning. So maybe you have a good answer for it, but that's something to think about as well. Like you said, there are neighbors close enough to lend the police officers Solo cups. Why not their neighbor? Why not the neighbor's yard? Why not across the street? Why not totally somewhere else? Because it was snowing too hard? So why even have them in your yard at all? So some things to think about.
Lay him in the street. Then maybe he gets run over by a snowplow.
Yeah, then it's hard to know, like, who was at fault.
Yeah, but now we're questioning the men in the arena again. So maybe the conspirators they didn't come up with very good ideas. That was the best they could come up with in the moment. It's like the Solo cups. The conspirators and the Solo cups, the same thing. Okay, guys, we'll be back next time. Can't wait to discuss this case with you some more. Who knows, by the time you're hearing this, maybe at least the prosecution will have finished their case. Hope springs eternal. Who can say? And, or maybe the case will be over and we'll look like idiots because the FBI will have raided the courthouse and arrested everyone. That could happen. Who knows? Then we'll just bury these episodes, and the only people who even know they happen will be our patrons. So everybody keep quiet. We're going to conspire together to make sure that no one ever knows we did these episodes if it turns out bad. All right, but we'll be back next time. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. No, I mean, it's been better.
And I get a little bit confused because I definitely zone out while I'm watching.
Well, it's easy to zone out. Watching at 1.5 speed helps. Some of that.
But you know what? It was funny because I forgot I was listening it at a fast speed. And at one point I was like, why is Flamati speaking so weirdly? And I was like, oh, right. Because I have it on high speed.
Okay. Who's the last person we talked to? We talked about
Nettle.
Okay.
Yeah, right? We talked about Nettle.
You're right.
Yes.
Because he's the first person who says she said, I hit him.
Why would you
I couldn't
do that?
see anything. I was like, stop doing it this way. This video is terrible.
They didn't have to do that.
No, they
because
didn't.
they didn't even compare them. It was like they looked at both at different times. You could have done them at separate times.
It's like, and
It
they're
really-
asking
I
you
was
to
very
look and see things. You're like, I can't see anything because there's only half the screen.
Because it's half the screen. We're the same person.
I know. I just.
It's summertime, and with Pluto TV's Summer of Cinema, the streaming is easy. Stream hundreds of free movies on all your favorite devices all summer long. Chill out poolside with Mission Impossible and Transformers. Or stay cool inside watching Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Titanic, or The Wolf of Wall Street. No matter your vibe, download the Pluto TV app to spend summer doing what you love. Watching endless movies. Tell me that's not the deal of the summer. Summer of Cinema on Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.